What's up, guys? Welcome to Nutmegged, the podcast where a Yank and a Brit talk about the beautiful game from across the pond. Now, of course, it is me, Faisal, representing the UK in London, and of course, with me again, we have Andrew.
Yo, what's good? Your boy representing the United States with the fresh cut, just got back, feeling good,
Fresh
looking good.
fades. So, this is an interesting episode. We're going to break down something we've been speaking on for quite a few weeks now, and it's obviously making a lot of news throughout football. It's kind of going across its kind of trajectory in terms of where it is across the news channels, sports channels, is making news headlines in politics as well. So it's an area we want to kind of break down and want to kind of break down to get into. So of course, it's the current country on everyone's lips at the moment, the current league at the moment on everyone's lips. It is the Saudi Pro League. So what we wanted to use this episode to do is break this down and see what we can do. Dissect it a little bit, give our views. We were just chatting earlier. I think it might be a little spicy one. So we'll get stuck into this and see what we can kind of come up with. So Andrew, do you want to give us some bit of background on the Saudi Pro League? Get stuck into that and we can dissect it.
I would love to do that, especially because if you're like me, an American soccer fan, you'll probably have read the news and you've seen all the big transfers of some of these big name players going to the Saudi Pro League. But you, even though you know about those players going over there and you know the Saudi Pro League exists now, you probably have no idea like what the Saudi Pro League is, other than maybe just some thought in your mind of like some arbitrary league, maybe kind of like the Premier League or maybe like the MLS if you're an American soccer fan. So I'm going to break it down very quickly. I'll give you some highlights from the history, and then I'll give you what the structure kind of looks like. And for us pro-rel side of the argument, for the people in the United States that want an open system, want the promotion relegation, an open system, like that pyramid structure, the Saudi Pro League does have kind of an interesting structure that might work in the United States. I'll break that down. First, let's just talk about some of the history. So we're talking Saudi Arabia, of course. That is where the Saudi Pro League is based. So up until the late 1950s, football/soccer in Saudi Arabia was organized on a regional basis. And then there was one main tournament called the King's Cup. So all of these regional teams were playing each other in their set regions, then would come together. And then the best teams out of those regions would play each other in the King's Cup, kind of like an early version of the Champions League, if you kind of understand what that structure looks like. So there were all those different regional tournaments in the Central, West, East, and North regions. Then eventually in the 1976, the start of that season, that was like the first ever professional football league in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Started off with 8 teams, and then the following season, they increased to 10. That happened for a few years, and then in the 1981-82 season, that was the merger of like 2 of the more dominant leagues in Saudi Arabia. So you saw the Saudi Premier League and then the Saudi First Division. They became one for that season exclusively because of the World Cup qualification process. They said, all right, let's just merge it all together. It probably is going to be better for our national team so that World Cup qualification can actually be something we have a conversation about. So the 20 teams were divided into 2 different groups, A and B. That is important because that whole process kind of gave them the idea of what a pyramid could potentially look like. So this was almost the trial period for setting up a full pyramid structure in their country. But after that season, it went back to the tier system of having those 2 divisions separate. And then in 1990, the Saudi Football Federation decided to merge the league with the King Cup into one tournament. So it was kind of all fractured at the moment. They were having this league, then they had the King's Cup, but then they had some other regional things happening all at the same time. So it was a bit confusing. So they said, okay, let's get this all organized into one league championship. It's a very interesting name. The custodian of the 2 Holy Mosques League Cup. Quite a mouthful. So that was the 2-stage championship. So all of this is to say that there is kind of a diverse history, and it kind of overlaps with some of the other soccer history around and some of it with the US too, kind of that structure. They're trying to figure out what the best structure is like inside of their country to make them competitive and to allow soccer to exist in their country. Ultimately, 2008 was like the last big change, and it kind of depends on the team. But what will happen is the four teams from Saudi Arabia, the top four that come about from the top division in Saudi Arabia, will qualify for the AFC Champions League. That happens every year. And that is the top three, including the winner of the King's Cup. If the King's Cup winner, which that King's Cup championship thing still exists. So if you win that tournament, you automatically qualify for that Champions League. And then the top division of the Saudi Pro League, which is the Saudi Pro League, that's the actual title, that individual club will, the top three of that league, those three clubs will then qualify for the AFC Champions League. Okay, that was a lot of history. Faisal, I'm going to ask if you have anything to plug in. I just want to kind of paint the picture. I know I've been talking a little while, but what is your take overall as we kind of now start to talk a little bit more about the actual structure and divisions?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's an interesting backdrop for us because now we know the history of it. Now we get an understanding of how it is in comparison, say, for example, the Premier League and how established it is. And that kind of brings us into how we are today, and it kind of leads us into what we kind of want to speak a bit more about. And what I wanted to kind of break down is, and as where you left it off at the moment in the current state of the Saudi Pro League in the moment. So the top three teams are obviously Al Nasser. I'm going to pronounce this awfully, so if you're listening, apologies. I probably shouldn't, but there we go. We've got Al Nasser, we have Al Ittihad, and Al Hilal as well. And they're the three top teams. They're actually owned 75% by the Public Investment Fund, which is essentially the Saudi government here. And the Saudi government it's an interesting one because they have a 2030 it's like a 2030 vision is what they kind of call it, and most countries do. It's a growing country, and they are growing fast, and as part of that, football and sport is a big brand and big identity is a key part of that, and the goal of that is to make the Saudi people more fitter, more healthier, and football is a big part of the sport, is a big part of that. But we know it's not just that. There is also a lot of money attached into these sporting areas. So the Saudi government know exactly what they're doing, and a big part of that is to really increase the profile of their league specifically as well. One thing to come before we kind of break down to get understanding a bit more about the Saudi Pro League is they are, I don't think at the moment, governed by FIFA at the moment. So this means that it's an interesting one in terms of what they can do, and what essentially what the levels and what they can what rules and regulations they have. Let's just say there probably isn't any, which makes things a little bit more interesting. We'll break down what it means for each individual team in a second as well. But obviously, the three top teams, you've got key players within that as well, and it's an interesting one. So, Andrew, what do you think from like the top three teams and from that perspective? Is there the fact there's lack of regulation here from the Saudi Pro League? Is it something that we should be worried about, or is it more that can be done?
I have an interesting take on this because I'm not the biggest fan of FIFA, at least not at the moment. So for me, I am a number one on the Enneagram test. So if any of you out there have taken personality tests, there's an Enneagram test that will tell you the kind of person or personality traits that you are, not necessarily about your personality, but about some of the traits that you have. Super interesting. You should check it out. But for me, that means as a one, I'm a perfectionist. I like people that follow the rules. There are clear set rules out there that FIFA established themselves, and then FIFA doesn't even follow their own rules. That frustrates me. So when it comes to if there's a league that is governed or not governed by FIFA, I don't really care because FIFA doesn't enforce their own rules. So to me, it doesn't really matter. I think it could be more interesting because they're not governed by some of FIFA's rules. And that may mean that they either one need to set up their own structure, which could be cool. And maybe they can think out of the box and develop something that's interesting. Also, it could mean that maybe they're able to bring in more players, do more unique things, offer more unique contracts. I mean, we're seeing the amount of money that's being thrown at some of these players under FIFA's contracts or under FIFA's rules. They probably wouldn't have been able to do some of these things. So this does make it at least interesting from the standpoint of, hey, we're bringing in some competitive players that are going to play against each other in what will probably now be a fairly competitive league, at least at the top of the table. So I do not mind that FIFA is not going to be a part of the conversation because I don't really love FIFA.
And my part of me is thinking as well is like, if you look at the Premier League at the moment, a lot of teams are currently under scrutiny for breaking these sorts of rules and regulations. And at the moment, if you argue the FIFA regulations at the moment, with the Premier League specifically, there are people, there are members, there are like teams, players, for example, Chelsea, prime example, that are kind of skirting around the rules a little bit, right? And if you look at Man City with their subsidiaries across the across the world, really, they've got little sub teams as well. New York City, the New York City FC, for example, as well. So they've got players, they've got clubs, for example. There are essentially businesses as well, and they're operating like businesses, and more clubs are operating like businesses. My argument is like, well, the Saudi Pro League, there is technically they don't need any regulations, right? There is, you could argue the regulations aren't necessarily working at the moment. Teams are paying for huge fees, and especially Manchester United playing for salaries, huge salaries, and there's technically little regulation there. So, what is the Saudi Pro League doing essentially wrong in comparison, or anything less or anything different to the regulations of FIFA? So, it's an interesting one to kind of look into. But yeah, we could go into the regulations forever, right? And that kind of brings into to what I was going to speak a bit more about. Obviously, the top three clubs, as you can probably see, they're owned by the investment side, the investment fund at the moment. From the current players that you've kind of seen, we should probably break down the current players, just give people a bit of context. I mean, not that everyone already will knows the big stars that are currently there at the moment, but do we want to do a little bit of a flavor in terms of who they've attracted here?
Yeah, let's do that. And then before we do, let me break down the structure of what the Saudi Pro League is. And then they actually have a pyramid structure in Saudi Arabia because they have always touted, especially now in news articles where some of these Saudis are getting interviewed about the league. They say they are a footballing nation. People there crave it, they're crazy for it. And it kind of does show that they've actually set up a pyramid structure that's open, that is quite competitive, and something that I wish the United States would do. And FIFA requires you to have an open system if you are to be inside of like the FIFA organization to be governed by FIFA. The MLS does not have that. America does not have that. So it's very frustrating. So that's why I think this structure is kind of cool. So what's happening in Saudi Arabia? So your first division, the Saudi Pro League, that's what we're talking about right now. That's where all these players are going to. That is your top division in Saudi Arabia. Then they have 4 levels underneath of that. So they have 5 levels total. So your top level, top division, Saudi Pro League. Your second one is the First Division League. I still don't really understand all of the namings of these things. Same with the Premier League too, because the championship you would think is the top, because the championship, if you use that word, is usually like the top. The Premier League is actually the top. Same here. Saudi Pro League is the top, but then the second one is the First Division League, is what it is. Naming could use some help. Then your third tier is the Second Division League. So in the second tier, so First Division League, there are 18 clubs. In the Saudi Professional League, level 1, there are 18 clubs. So we're going from number 1, again, Saudi Pro League. That's your top. That's what you need to remember. That's the important one. You take down a step. First Division League, 18 clubs. Another step down into 3. This is where it starts to get a little bit more interesting. You have your Second Division League. There are 32 clubs total, but they're divided into 2 groups. So Group A and Group B. This is how I would want it to work in the United States. You would have regions. So you would have separate groups inside of one division, which is really cool. And then the winners of those groups, then like your top 3, for example, would compete with each other. And then in kind of like a little playoff structure, kind of like what happens in the championship. And then you would eventually have the winners of that get promoted to the First Division League. So again, that was 3. Level 3, your Second Division League divided into Group A and Group B. Then you have your Saudi Third Division, which actually is the 4th rung on the pyramid. That is 40 clubs in that Saudi Third Division divided into 4 different groups, which again would be really awesome. It continues to filter down into different regions and different groups so that it is allowing more teams to be a part of this, even if it is difficult for smaller teams to do more traveling like it would be in the United States. You have it broken down into regions, which is really cool. Then you have the Saudi Fourth Division, and that is like almost your different city, small types of leagues. So if you're thinking from an American's sports standpoint, you'll have like your rec leagues in different cities. That is what the 4th division essentially is, where you have those small, regionalized, hyper local teams competing with one another. It's cool because it's an open system. Even if you're starting at the very bottom, if you're in that Saudi 4th division, you could still work your way up to the top. If your team is good enough, you bring in players, you bring in investment. So it's really cool to see. I would love a structure like this in the United States. I think this is actually a great idea of how to do it, to look at this as an example. And we talked about the history in the beginning, how they've kind of filtered through, tried some different things. This is the culmination of them trying all of those different things, merging their first divisions for a little bit, experimenting with like one Champions League and then having some different regional leagues. They've created this pyramid, which I think is really cool and actually really effective. I'm not necessarily a fan of overall this topic of Saudi Arabia bringing in a bunch of players, which we'll talk in a little bit, just to try to bolster their league. But I really like the structure that they have created, and I do appreciate that. Thoughts on the structure? How does that look for you? And I know
Yeah.
being a UK individual, you're more used to this type of structure. This is kind of new for us Americans.
Yeah, I mean, as you were breaking it down, it made total sense. Obviously, you've got the Championship, League One, League Two, League Three, and it kind of goes down from obviously Premier League at the beginning. And my initial thought, as you were speaking about, I mean, we know how passionate you are about specifically these sorts of leagues and this sort of like this pyramid scheme. It makes total sense as an American football fan. But I was more questioning kind of grassroots football and trying to get an understanding from a Saudi perspective. As we'll break down in a second, they're bringing players up and they're bringing players from abroad, fantastic players, bringing them in. What is happening to Saudi Arabian footballers specifically? And that's an interesting point and an interesting question because I think there's probably young, hungry Saudi Arabian footballers. Would they ever get the chance to really bring up to go those leagues? What is and this is something that perhaps we can explore further and probably be clearer as time goes on. What is their scouting policy like? Are for example, Al Nasser people like winning Ronaldo's camp and that team's camp? Are they going to the tier four, for example, to find those gems? Are they going to build up the players? But also number one, obviously number two as well. In addition to this as well, you obviously have the Saudi government backing the top three teams, 75% in terms of investment fund. Is that money trickling down? Is the question. Is there money going down to those lower leagues? Is there any support available, like perhaps the UK does with the FA Cup? That's the FA in general. So is there going to be more backing? That's what I'd love to see. I'd love to see at some point from this pyramid sort of leagues, etc., as you kind of spoke about, a Saudi Arabia. Is there a Saudi Arabian Ballon d'Or winner? That's my question, and that's what I'm about to. Is there in this structure a Saudi Arabian Ballon d'Or winner?
Honestly, I think they are doing the right things to get to that. And what the officials of this league have said, and even government individuals, people that are part of the public investment fund, have claimed that, hey, we're doing all of this to help Saudi Arabian football. That certainly means the league bringing in more international stars, of course, making it more fun for fans. But also, they have said specifically that they want to help Saudi Arabian individuals to make their national team better. And they think that this strategy of making soccer football more popular in Saudi Arabia will give more resources to those players who want to develop and then who want to represent them on the national team level. I
But
do
then,
think this, yeah, go ahead.
no, you go ahead. Go.
I do think that it's probably an interesting route just because you know how much money they have. So they could have, for the longest time, have been developing players, creating different types of institutions, training academies. So Argentina, for Barcelona, it's Barcelona. So they have created some type of youth program headquarters in the United States. So they're doing that because they know, all right, we have a bunch of money that we can invest and we want to develop young stars. We know that there are some Americans that are starting to come up on the national stage, and we want to make sure that we're going to be at the forefront of that and have them come through our academy. Saudi Arabia could have been doing that. They have a ton of money. They can bring in good coaches. That should have been happening a long time ago. They're going the reverse model of saying, hey, let's make a strong domestic league. We can invest, get people excited, and then develop players along the way to help us have a better team nationally.
And as you spoke about nationally as well, I think the whole goal of the Saudi Pro League and then the Saudi Pro League and specifically the 2030 vision as well is to get the World Cup to Saudi Arabia, right? So for them to host the games at some point, to be able to host this incredible tournament that everyone loves, the World Cup, and you'll be able to get to that point, Saudi Arabian football, specifically the national team, getting to that map, the round of 16 quarterfinals. That's what you want to see the Saudi team performing if you have a league as strong as the league you're looking to build. But for me, another question that came to mind is as I was talking about this was, say you do have a Saudi Arabian sort of Ballon d'Or winner and someone who is, tearing apart the Pro League outside of the players that we'll go into in a second, outside of the more prominent Ronaldo, for example. What is there to say that a Real Madrid, a Barcelona, And even Manchester United and Man City isn't just going to pick up the phone and take the gem that the Saudi Arabia Pro League has built, essentially, and bringing them to the I suppose the arguably the top five leagues of European football. You'd argue as a Saudi Arabian player, your goal is not to win the Saudi Pro League. Perhaps it is, perhaps it isn't, but perhaps it's more likely is to go and play for the Real Madrid, play for the Barcelonas, the Man City, the United, for example, Liverpool, if we have to put them in there, right? So it's those sorts of questions, and for me, that's probably where there'll be a change, and that's when you'll see the players really understanding of what is their goal. Like, is it to go to those areas, or will Saudi probably be able to kind of fit the bill in regards to, say, Real Madrid and Barcelona? I don't think so. So I think as a young player, you're still aiming for those areas, but that'd be an interesting question for us to look into.
I think the answer to actually the COO of the league talked about this a little bit. Their aim is first goal is to be a top 10 league in the world, and then filtering up from there, and then try to fight to be one of those top 5 league spots, maybe in like the next 20 years. I think that could be realistic. I mean, with the right type of investment, you can do anything. You see that with Manchester City. Manchester City wasn't necessarily like one of the top teams in England maybe 30 years ago, maybe even 20 years ago, but just throw in some money, get a really good manager in there, and you're winning a bunch of trophies. So I think that can be a possibility for them. I do think that overall the history of those big tier clubs in Europe are still going to be more appealing. But I mean, look at Saudi Arabia. They beat Argentina in the group stage in the last World Cup. So they're doing some things
Of
right.
course,
And I think
yeah,
this will at least try to bring up and get more excitement for local Saudi Arabians that are good at football to get better and then go off to those other leagues. We'll see if that will happen or not. But now let's talk about some of the players that did make the move. So I do have a list of some of these players that are jumping, and this was in 2023 alone. So I'll just throw out some of the names pretty quick, which most of these you will know. Sadio Mane, of course, going to Al Nasser. The one that I'm actually really excited about is Alan St. Maximin. He is cool. I've had him on my fantasy teams before. He's just an electric, like winger slash striker, formerly of Newcastle. So he's going to Al Ali, I think is how you say that name.
yeah, that's
So
correct.
they're going to have an exciting roster. Riyad Mahrez also going to the same team as well. Jordan Henderson making a controversial move to agree to go over to Saudi Arabia. Malcolm, Roman Saiz, Alex Tellez, Seko Fofana, Serge Milankovic Savic, Roberto Firmino. So Roberto Firmino is also going to Al Ali. So that's Roberto Firmino, Riyad Mahrez, and Alan St. Maximin. So like that front three is going to actually be exciting to watch. So I am looking forward to that. While I may not be the biggest fan of this whole transformation, the Saudi Pro League thing, but that is an exciting front three. Marcelo Brozovic, Jota, Edward Mendy, Karim Benzema, of course, the reigning Ballon d'Or winner. That's an interesting talking point. N'Golo
Huge.
Kante, Ruben Neves making the jump. He's also an interesting one because he was in his prime, still is, and was talking to some of the top teams in Europe to secure his services, but he chose to go to Saudi Arabia. So that's a nice gem in their cap. Kalidou Koulibaly, Cristiano Ronaldo. Those are the 2023 signings to date. What do you think?
See, I see two groups of people in this. I see players that perhaps are maybe not necessarily past there, but are people who have perhaps reached their ceilings, and maybe they are looking perhaps not necessarily on their way out, but they are top ranking players that can probably get into any team, but they're here for like just to kind of see off their career and get a bit of essentially a wage packet, which we'll break into in a second as well. And I see people, for example, that are other kind of clubs which have really other players that I feel like are not necessarily playing at perhaps the level they want to, but they probably won't get in any higher in terms of where they want to kind of go, and they really want that money. And that's probably where it is. You Jordan Henderson, for example, you don't see him going anywhere else, and you got your Riyad Mahrez, for example, Premier League, Champions League winner as well. You'd argue as a player of that level, you're probably not. You've kind of peaked in that regard. You're looking to get some sort of money, nice paycheck, get some bit of change, and essentially see out your career for a period of time. And then you obviously got your players like your Benzema, for example, Conte, these players that are perhaps, they're not the youngest players, your Ronaldo's, for example, they're not youngest players, but they are definitely in a point where they could probably raise the profile of this league. They're paid how much, which we'll get into, is crazy, but to really bring up that as well. So that's the two kind of players I kind of see. It's an interesting one to kind of put into that play. As you say, I'm pretty interested by the likes of Benzema specifically being Ballon d'Or, current Ballon d'Or winner, and they'll see how he performs. If he's anything, how Messi is tearing up the US league at the moment in MLS, that'll be interesting to break down. So for me, obviously Benzema is an interesting one to watch, and also I think another player that kind of comes obviously you kind of spoke about already was say Maximum, because I think electric player down the wing are really interesting to watch. The likes of Steven Gerrard in management in a going abroad straight to the Saudi league from like Aston Villa and other kind of clubs and Celtic, and it'd be interesting to see how he fits in as well. So yeah, I think that is an interesting one. Who's the player that shocked you the most in terms of making that move to Saudi Arabia?
Honestly, I think that it's Ruben Neves. So that's not the sexiest transfer that Saudi Arabia has brought in, but I think that is the one that is most important because it's showing other players now. Like Ruben Neves is in his prime. He's 26 years old. He was linked to Manchester United. So that is saying I have the options to potentially play for some of the best clubs in the world, but I'm making the decision now actively to go to Saudi Arabia instead. So I think one, that is showing other players that's an opportunity now of, hey, maybe in my prime, I should be going over to play in Saudi Arabia. I'm going to make more money over there. The structure seems all right. It's going to at least be fairly competitive. And now with some of these potential like advertising deals, media deals, like this could all actually work out in my favor. The other side of that coin is that Saudi Arabia is probably happiest with this signing. Cristiano Ronaldo probably is up there as well. But then Ruben Neves is probably second, if not competing for that spot, because of that exact reason of showing other players in your prime, you can come to Saudi Arabia. We give you a good deal. It's a good place to play, and it's very competitive. What about you? What do you think is the most interesting signing?
Um, for me, most interesting signing, or probably the most shocking signing for me, was probably Jordan Henderson. I don't see, and if anyone had told me that this year that Jordan Henderson would be leaving Liverpool, number one, I didn't see him leaving Liverpool personally. Secondly, going to Saudi Arabia is the second thing, and there's rumors of him 700,000, I think, a week, which is it 700? It might be 300,000, 700,000. That's one of the figures I'm hearing. Um, that's incredible for a player of Jordan Henderson's level, which I personally don't think. And that again, in comparison with in terms of Neves, for me, it was a kind of a point where I'm here for a bit of a pay packet here. I can definitely see myself. I'm not going to get any better payment here. I'm Jordan Henderson. I'm not even starting necessarily for England at the moment. Maybe I can still get into Liverpool's squad, but I'm not not the best player in the world. Yet I could be making probably higher than most players in the Premier League making, and that is insane for Jordan Henderson. For me, that's pretty shocking. And that kind of brings into, as you're going to spoke about from Neves, but also this rumors of Mbappe, right? And these I'm seeing things like some sort of like 1 point something billion pound contract deals, and I'm like, this is genuinely, I mean, it's desperation from Saudi Pro League for sure, because that is incredible. He's easily one of the best players in the world, if not one of the best players in the world, and I think they will see it as a massive scalp. And that's probably when I think most people will then start turning their heads to go, okay, this is now the Saudi Pro League. If a player of Mbappe's level goes to the Saudi Pro League, I think that'll massively turn heads, and I think people will then begin to start taking the clubs and that league seriously for sure.
So that is an interesting topic because they did make that offer officially to PSG, but it was only for a year and it was for a loan because Mbappe has 1 year left on his contract. He's already told PSG he doesn't want to stay there after that to renew his contract. So they're trying to figure out what to do with him. And they were talking about potentially either loaning him to Saudi Arabia or Saudi Arabia just purchasing him for the final year. They made the offer. and it was accepted by PSG, but Mbappe said no. So that was an opportunity on the table, but
Interesting.
Mbappe said no to that. However, there's even a new rumor that I think came out today because Neymar is now not happy being at PSG. So PSG, of course, like have to figure out what to do with that. So the rumors have already started of saying, hey, Neymar could be going over to Saudi Arabia. There's this really cool thing by BR Report. I think it's Bleacher Report or something like that,
Beach report, yeah.
and they make this fun Champions League animated thing on YouTube. It's like one of the best things I've ever watched. They had predicted this, that with Cristiano Ronaldo going over to Saudi Arabia, he calls Neymar on the phone and says, yo, come visit. And it is hilarious. If you've not seen it, watch it. But they could have predicted it. They could have said, hey, this is actually going to happen. And maybe it will, because now the rumors are actually happening. And Neymar could be going over and getting a big payday in Saudi Arabia. Wild
Does
times.
does anyone really want to stay at PSG? Because I'm getting the seems to be question marks all over the club. Honestly, it's crazy. And speaking of PSG as well, they are also owned by Qataris and sort of United Arab Emirates and that side of stuff. So there's investment there as well. So it's almost like going back around, and that specifically area is huge with money, and it is definitely a point where people are turning their heads, but they're also question marking where this money is coming from, and that is again a one for another podcast. And hey, we don't speak politics here, I suppose, but it's an interesting one
I'm
for us to
happy
break
to.
down. Break it down for us, Andrew. Break it down for us.
Well, actually, let's talk about it just a little bit,
Okay.
because the
Okay.
Public Investment Fund, that is like the arm of the government, which is like technically separate because they explain it as separate. So this is how they allow this money to be invested into these clubs. And that public investment fund is what is funneling the money into the clubs to allow them to buy all these crazy players and to do some external investing for the country as well. So let's talk about that very quickly. So the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, they actually own the majority of the top 4 clubs in this league. So the Saudi Pro League are majority owned by the Public Investment Fund. This is the reason, this investment fund, with all their money coming from the government of Saudi Arabia, the state of Saudi Arabia, that's the reason that the clubs can throw this crazy money around. But they're not only doing that in the Saudi Pro League. The Public Investment Fund owns a ton of different investments in sports and other places around the world as well. They have an 80% stake in Newcastle. So if you've been following Newcastle for the past year, you know that Saudi Arabia purchased that stake, and they're going to start investing money and have already done so in Newcastle. The topic of Newcastle we'll probably have to talk about a little bit later, because all the money wasn't necessarily pumped into Newcastle right away, but they started doing well, the right manager, the right structure in place. So that is a fun story to look at. But Saudi Arabia, this public investment fund, does own 80% of Newcastle. They're also the creators of the Live Golf Tour. So if you follow the PGA or golf at all, you'll know that the Live Golf Tour was created by Saudi Arabia by this public investment fund to compete with the PGA Tour. And it did so well, it brought in a bunch of big golfers. So that was essentially like the precursor to them purchasing all of these big players to join the Saudi Pro League. They created all these contracts and brought in some of the top golfers in the world in their prime to golf on the Live Golf Tour instead of the PGA Tour. Tons of drama. It ended up in a weird way where the PGA and Live Golf Tour agreed to merge. So now Saudi Arabia has like a big hand in the decision making of world golf in the PGA as well. So that's an interesting topic to kind of keep your eye on if you are a sporting individual and like all of that news. So the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia really has their hands in a lot of different things. And really, this is not necessarily a brand new thing. So they're starting to get some of the high level, high quality stars in the Saudi Pro League. But this was still something that's been happening for the past 5 or 6 years, where this league has always been kind of a destination for one final big payday for some of those aging stars. But this government backing has what supercharged the funding and allowed people like Cristiano Ronaldo, Riyad Mahrez, Sadio Mane, all of those players to come in and to be a little bit closer to their prime, as opposed to just getting those aging retired stars. If you're a fan of the MLS, you'll know it was called a retirement league for the longest time, because they would bring in some of those older players like David Beckham, Steven Gerrard, Pirlo, as they were aging out of their careers. So kind of a similar parallel to the MLS and the Saudi Pro League in that aspect. So the objective of the Pro League, coming from the Public Investment Fund, is to be one of the top leagues in the world, starting off trying to get into that top 10 league conversation and then looking forward as what the league's officials have been saying. And this structure might actually have that work for them, as we've talked about. The other interesting element to this, and one of the reasons that the Public Investment Fund is pumping money into the Saudi Pro League, is because Saudi Arabia is bidding for the 2030 World Cup. They want to host the World Cup. And with a strong domestic league and global popularity of that league, that will only help their cause in actually getting the World Cup established in Saudi Arabia for 2030. Now, all of this is kind of wrapped around a deeper conversation that is very political. It's sports washing. Sports washing is a conversation that has been had before this has even come to fruition, where all these players are joining Saudi Arabia. It's been a conversation for a very long time with not even just Saudi Arabia, but other countries doing this, other companies doing sports washing. And I will break down sports washing, what it looks like and how it's happening in the world. But first, I want to toss it to you, Faisal, and get your thoughts overall on like this investment structure. So like the government, the state of Saudi Arabia creating this investment fund so that they can invest in other places. This isn't unique. Other countries do this too, but to this extent, to this level, and to get so minute as to allow that investment to purchase players for teams. What do you think about that?
I think it's from my perspective. I think it shows that Saudi Arabia got a lot of pride in their country, and I think it is coming from the above, coming from the top. They want to see their people and their country do well, not necessarily just as sport, but over generally, whether that be politically, whether that would be more generally within their health of their individuals, within their sort of their people specifically. So for me, it says a lot about the teams, and it says a lot about the government in particular. But also, it's an interesting because I'm sure we'll kind of break down to sports washing in a second, but where exactly is the money coming from? And what actually are the goals? If it is a 2030 vision, is football, is the Pro League really the area they should be investing money in? Is one area, right? So it's a lot of money swirling around. Is it one specific area that should be invested in? Is there other areas that could be done better invested in? Is there a particular reason behind those areas? So yeah, I question market a lot, and I think for me, it's really understanding, and we'll get an idea of this in the next few years, how this kind of pans out, and how we see it kind of going forward. But I'll let you break down sports washing because I really want to break down and get your view on MLS versus the Saudi Pro League in a second. So, do you want to just delve into sports washing for us?
Oh, I would be more than happy to. Sports washing is something that I am not happy about. And if you listen to previous conversations on this podcast, you'll know that I would give up my Manchester United fandom to select another team to support if they are purchased by Saudi Arabia or any type of state that is trying to use them for sports washing. So let's break down what the heck is sports washing. Let me give you a specific definition: the practice of individuals, groups, corporations, or governments using sports to improve reputations tarnished by wrongdoing. I looked up a bunch of different definitions, and I think this one is just like so short, so specific. There is some type of organization, state, person doing bad things, and they want to use sports to make those bad things not look as bad. That has been happening for ages and ages, and it doesn't even just consider itself into sports. Other things have been used to try to make people think that they're not doing as bad of things by showing you something else nice and shiny and fun. So, the reason for a lot of big corporations, especially like oil corporations, so you'll see like big oil sponsors on the front of some of the biggest soccer teams in the world. And what is the reason for that? You would think, okay, from a marketing perspective, usually if you're going to be advertising your brand to millions of people, it would be a consumer facing brand. So, like Kia, for example, or Chevrolet. Chevrolet has been on the jersey of Manchester United many times, or a couple times for the past few years. And that makes sense. Chevrolet sells cars. People see Manchester United, love their jerseys, buy them. Chevrolet's on the front. Maybe I should buy a Chevrolet. But an oil company, if I see, okay, there's a big oil company on the front of Manchester United's jersey, I'm not a person that's going to go out and buy oil. I don't think I could even do that unless I'm just trying to buy the stock in a company. So it's not a consumer facing brand. So it's weird. Why would they do that? The reason is because those big corporations want to show people that they're positive. They support their club and then they become part of that club. So then you don't look as negatively on the bad things that that corporation or that company is doing. So let's talk about one very specific example that doesn't involve Saudi Arabia at all. So this is just a good example of what sports washing can do and can almost like brainwash some fans. So we all know, unfortunately, the war that's happening in Ukraine right now. So we remember kind of when that got started and it actually affected some of the start and some of the ownership in the Premier League. So there was a game, it was Burnley versus Chelsea. And this happened just recently after Russia attacked Ukraine. So Burnley held a 1 minute applause for the people of Ukraine. And it makes sense. So Russia, being the aggressor, just kind of went in, attacked Ukraine. No one is in support of that. It's just a very unfortunate thing. So, like a nice thing that Burnley did in support to show solidarity with Ukraine. There were Chelsea fans and many, many Chelsea fans. It was audible. There were conversations after. Thomas Tuchel had talked about it in an interview. And those Chelsea fans chanted Roman Abramovich's name instead of clapping for Ukraine. Roman Abramovich, one of the oligarchs in Russia, the former now owner of Chelsea. So instead of supporting Ukraine, they clapped and cheered for Roman Abramovich, which is just crazy. And like I said, the now former owner of Chelsea, he was forced out by the league and wasn't able to maintain ownership of Chelsea. But the reason behind that, so Roman Abramovich ended up being the man who brought them 2 Champions League titles, 5 Premier League trophies, 5 FA Cups, and 3 League Cups. But he's a Russian oligarch. So, like, you can see, like, in the Chelsea's fans' head, like, this dude did so much for our club. But now he's like a bad guy because he's supporting the Russian regime that's now attacking Ukraine. So it's like two divided mindsets. So now that is ultimately what sports washing is, because you have that identity in that club that you represent, that you support, now being twisted because it's being represented by someone bad that's doing bad things. So are you supposed to like support the bad decisions that they're making because he's a part of your club? It gets really convoluted and tough as a fan. And that is what those people, those organizations, those states want to do. They want to make it confusing for fans to make their bad actions look not so bad after all, because look at all the good things they did. They helped Chelsea do so much good stuff. So that's just an example of what sports washing can do, not even the example of Saudi Arabia. So there are many, many other examples like that, and you can see it as an examples with Sheikh Mansour of Abu Dhabi and the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia buying Manchester City and Newcastle United. We've talked about that a little bit. So there are more investments where the Saudi Arabian individuals, Qatari individuals like PSG are doing stuff like that, trying to get involved with soccer clubs, other organizations, so that their bad things that they do in their country, the human right abuses that are happening in those countries are the topic that get overlooked now. It's not the main topic anymore because they're doing so many good things for football. They're investing in these clubs, finding big success like with Manchester City. Now those bad things in their country maybe don't look as bad or as not talked about as badly because they're doing other good stuff to offset it. And like, really, how bad can it be? Ronaldo went there now. So if he's going to be in Saudi Arabia, I mean, if I love Cristiano Ronaldo, then I'm going to say, like, man, he's making the decision. So it must not be that bad. So you can see how deep it can get, how deep in the weeds. And I mean, ultimately, it seems like a pretty strong strategy from the Saudi Arabian perspective, because if you can get players like Cristiano Ronaldo, one of the best players ever, if not the best player ever, which I still think it's messy, but to get him to come and play in the Saudi Pro League, if you support him, you're probably going to support Saudi Pro League and then really not think much about all the negatives that are happening in that country. Now, I've been talking a long time, Faisal, I know, and some of you probably don't really care about sports washing, but now you at least know about it, what it is, and I'm going to give you one final example, another non-Saudi Arabian related one, even though the Saudi Arabian one really is annoying to me. So it's one bad thing, like if an oil company does it, but if you have human rights abuses and you're trying to use sports washing as a country to cover that up, get the frick out of my face. I hate that. Here's a less intense example. So this one is actually from a while ago in the 1800s, which is pretty cool. So football has always been more than about just the game. Of course, there's investment, money always being thrown around. It supports communities, all that kind of stuff, the good and the bad. So when mine owner, it's like a mine where you're mining for gold and coal and all that kind of stuff, Samuel Tizak and his shipbuilder, Robert Turnbull, invested in Sunderland. They lured a bunch of Scottish professionals south to make their club between 1892 and 1895 the best side in the world. Yes, if you didn't know, Sunderland, it used to be like the top team in the world. You wanted to be supporting Sunderland. So they weren't just doing it because they loved the game. It gave them status in their community. It created an image of giving them saying, hey, we're giving back to the workforce and supporting this community. So like that's a good thing. So even though we're doing bad stuff to our workers in the mines and in our shipbuilding yards, at least we're supporting the community. Like, look at how good our football team is now. Just crazy. So that's sports washing. Hit me up on Instagram, or I would say Twitter, but Twitter's not a thing anymore. I guess X. Just hit me up if you have questions about that. I could talk about sports washing all day very clearly. But Faisal, I know you probably have a different perspective than I do because I'm an American sports fan, and like that's something that's talked about regularly in our media. So what is your breakdown on all this?
I mean, as you were speaking, I thought to myself, it's incredibly fascinating stuff. And I think not enough is done, especially in the media. I suppose that kind of makes sense, right? Like the media is going to be shouting about these sorts of things. And I think sports washing is being heavily overlooked here, specifically in the UK as well. I think there is, if you look at it, those sorts of countries, there's a lot of fingers and a lot of pies here in the UK, a lot of businesses, lots of big organizations. If they go far and far back, a lot of their investment funds, they probably don't want to say anything, right? And there's probably not enough being said about it because a lot of people don't want to shake the apple cart or don't want to kind of affect anything or impact anything because a lot of it is essentially done by these countries. And it is, and I unfortunately I think personally I think this is kind of just the beginning. I think that we'll find more and more examples, and I think this is only one example, and of, for example, the pro league specifically talking about is only one example of how things potentially are gonna get worse. And a lot of these companies, organizations, are going to be doing more and more, and whether that'll move away from football or whether that'll go into other areas. Obviously, football's a beautiful game, millions of pounds in it. It tends to be quite, I say, fairly easy in terms of trying to sort of purchase a team. You've got money, you can purchase a team. It seems like most people are doing it. For example, I've seen like LeBron James stake in Liverpool. Like if anyone wants a team, you can get a team, and I think that's probably going to get wet. That's going to get bigger and bigger, and most opportunities going to go into that. And I think that kind of brings me into talking about countries specifically, and something we kind of touched on briefly upon originally before we began. This was obviously this is Saudi Pro League is giving echoes of the Chinese Super League specifically, which I think is probably an element of sports washing in that as well. We all obviously appreciate um, China's stance in terms of human rights as well, and that side of the politics of the Chinese Republic in particular. But what is your take on in terms of the Chinese Super League? And the question I was going to pose more generally was: is the Saudi Pro League just another Chinese Super League? Like, is it also going to be? Are we looking at the same thing?
Yes, we are. Like it is the exact same thing that's happening with the same exact goals. However, this was going to be my nutmegged of the episode. I'm going to give it to you right now. China, they they're very entertaining the way that they went about this. So, yes, I'll kind of give you a breakdown really quickly. So, the Chinese Super League, they did the same exact thing. If you remember, like 6 or 7 years ago, they started signing players like Oscar coming from Chelsea. So, straight from Chelsea to a team in the Chinese Super League. And when that happened, everyone was like, what? Kind of came out of nowhere. No one's really expecting that type of transfer to happen. Arnautovic, also a very strong player back then, ends up going straight to China as well. And people are like, whoa, what is happening here? So this was a goal from China. The government created this idea, this plan to say, hey, let's bolster our domestic league. We want to host a World Cup in China as well. So this is a great plan to do this. And doing this investment of getting other bigger players to play in the Chinese Super League will then also bolster our Chinese players, making them better, making us have a better national team. So if you have been listening earlier in this episode, you'll know those three things are also exactly what the Saudi Pro League authorities have said they want to accomplish with the Saudi Pro League investment. So that we're looking at the exact same thing here. However, the reason that this is a nutmegged for me, for the China side of it, is that this was actually an order from the Chinese government to implement this strategy. However, they didn't go through with it. That is the dumb part. So they didn't end up liking how much money was flowing from the Chinese government or internally of China, flowing to foreign individuals and out of China. So they're like, oh crap, we didn't think that through. All this money is now going to foreign individuals. It's leaving China. We're losing our money. So, like, maybe we should stop doing this. And then they're like, well, I guess we did. So they stopped that. They stopped the foreign investment for the most part. There were still some foreign players being brought in and things like that, but they put harsher roster rules in place to stop teams from buying more expensive international talent. So I think Saudi Arabia probably learned from what the Chinese Super League was trying to do, but they just actually, Saudi Arabia actually ended up following through and saying, okay, we know that we're going to be losing money. It's going to be going and transferring out of Saudi Arabia, but we're getting the benefit of that investment of having a stronger domestic league. We're having more opportunities for local players to play competitively, and we're getting more media attention overall on our country, on our league. So that's what we want. So my nutmeg is China didn't pull through, didn't decide to look into the future and see what would actually happen, but Saudi Arabia did, and they're going to probably, most likely, go through and build and see the fruits of all of this investment.
I'm going to disagree. I think we're not going to see a Chinese Super League, and that takes me back to the vision of the Pro League and the Saudi Arabian government in general. I think there's too much riding on this as an organization. I think the Saudi Arabian people are very shrewd businessmen, and they're probably perhaps potentially more shrewd than the Chinese in this respect. And I think this for them isn't just a short term thing. The fact that we've dedicated one episode to this is also the beginning potentially of, you can see that this is almost transcending sport in general. It's bringing attention, it's bringing sponsorship, it's bringing more and more organizations. There's going to be more and more organizations having hubs, for example, in Saudi Arabia, apparently where all the money is, roles, jobs, careers, are heading towards Saudi Arabia, and those are the spaces. And I think what it is, it's not just growing the football; it's also bringing the overall kind of view of Saudi Arabia up. And I think it'll only be the kind of the tip of the iceberg. I think they will probably get the 2030 World Cup. I said fairly confident about that. I do think also, if you look at it from the players, I think more and more players will come through for sure. I think people will see that. I think we're in for a very good league this year from a Saudi Pro League perspective. I think it's going to be really interesting to watch personally, and I think with this time, it's going to essentially show more and more teams are going. All it really takes personally is one player to go, which is at their prime, like a Haaland or a Mbappe, for example, to go to the Saudi Pro League, for it to kind of be enshrined essentially in, it's like, this we're here now. Saudi Pro League's here. We're not just a club trying to create a league in its own. We've got some of the best players coming to us. And I think that, and I think for them, regulations won't impact. I don't think they'll add more regulations to it. They've seen, like you've said, what's happened in the Chinese Pro League. They're not going to make the same mistakes. And I don't think we're going to see another Chinese Pro. I think we're going to see something which is going to be pretty special for the next 10 years. I'm interested to see how it kind of comes together and it kind of creates. It's going to be an interesting one. I think also there's bigger players coming here. There's only a handful of like you said, the Oscar. There was also, like I said, Arnautovic. Only a handful of Chinese players who came for large fees. Here you've got managers coming through. You've got players which are, you'd argue, mid-level. You've got fantastic players coming here, like Oscar and Arnautovic, for example, and Paulinho was another player was going out from
Hulk.
there. Hulk, exactly. These players are no Cristiano Ronaldo or Karim Benzema, right? Like, the levels are different here, right? The money, arguably, probably is the same, probably less or more, right? Around the same in terms of money wise. So I think we're looking at something a little bit different here. And I think that it's going to be an interesting one for the next 5 to 10 years to develop in further.
I actually agree. So I probably didn't explain that super well. I think that we're seeing another Chinese Super League in terms of structure, but I think Saudi Arabia will actually follow through and build it. When China just stopped and did not and didn't actually think about like what the ramifications
It's the
would be.
long term. It's the long term goal,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yep. I think Saudi Arabia will actually do it and create what China tried to create but couldn't end up doing it because their COO said, the COO of the Saudi Pro League, that this is not a one-off year of signings. We have more money that is going to be invested, that more players will be signed and developed in the coming years. And there are multiple media reports that say Saudi Arabia has allocated more than $17 billion with a
Wow.
B to support clubs under the country's Vision 2030 economic and social reform blueprint. Interesting that they have $17
Scary.
billion to sign players and do whatever that general statement means of supporting clubs under their vision of 2030. Unfortunately, why can't they just invest some of that money into human rights? See, like that's what it comes back to me. Like you can spend all this money on all this cool, crazy, fun stuff, but like why not help out your population? Why not create like this awesome utopian society with all this money that you have? You have just so much money that it doesn't matter. You could create all of this awesome place to live and be where the world wants to be. You could be like the Garden of Eden. And then you're choosing to just throw a bunch of money at football players to transfer them in, which you could
Mm.
probably do that and create the Garden of Eden society. You could do all of that. It's just confusing to me. So I don't really know. But there are going to be people watching this league for sure. So I don't even know how you say this. This is like a UK company, I think. Maybe Dazn, DAZN. I don't really
DAZN.
know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
DAZN.
okay. So they are in talks of getting the broadcasting rights for the UK audience. And they're also talking about working with IMG so that can be then broadcast into the US and Canada as well. So my question to you is, which this will probably happen, will you watch these games and how intensely will you follow them if you will?
I mean, I think we were discussing this. I'm intrigued by this league, and that's because of some of the players, some of the teams they're building. It excites me. Like I personally would now rather watch, like an Al Nasser versus, an Al Hilal club, like a team game where you've got some incredible players on show than say like a Burnley versus Crystal Palace. Like I'm going to hold my hands up and say the quality of football probably is, it's going to be interesting to kind of see. But I think for me, it's the star quality players in there, but also it's intriguing, it's new, it's fresh. We're seeing the likes of Jordan Henderson and players like Riyad Mahrez. Can you imagine the front three of Riyad Mahrez, Saint Maximum, and Firmino? Like it's almost like a person. It's kind of the way I would play it. It's kind of like FIFA, right? Like you've just like FIFA. People obviously the sports game, EA Sports FIFA game that most people have on their PlayStation or Xbox. It's kind of like pricking players, putting them in a squad with fairly, so I'd say, average players around them, but still you've got key players in that. So I personally, I'm definitely going to try and catch some games for sure. I'm interested to see how it's going to be from like a time perspective, whether we're going to end up staying late or up late, early in the morning, and how that's going to work. But I definitely want to catch some of the games. I'm not watching it. I didn't watch it last season just for like we're not. I'm not following Cristiano Ronaldo around. Let's put it this way, right? And that's kind of what the Pro League was last year. It was just Ronaldo, and some of the results weren't great. Then they're not winning the league, question marks again. But it is what it is. But what Ronaldo did more for that league, not necessarily win them, was to bring these players in. And remember, there's that clip that goes around all the time that Ronaldo has an interview and he's talking about this is a great league, this will be a best league, people will be coming here, and he has started that. So I'm interested to see the likes of Benzema and Kante in the same team. Like it's like fantasy team stuff, right? So I definitely will definitely give it a watch, and I reckon one or two games for sure. I'll definitely some of the big club games. I'll definitely watch. I mean, it's not going to be my weekly. Like I'm not going to stick it to my. It's not added to my weekly Manchester United games, but and this is what I was going to speak to and bring into yourself as well before I get into whether you watch it or not. Is as much as the players they can bring into it, I just don't think it'll top the likes of the Premier League. I don't think it'll top the Champions League. I just don't think, no matter how hard they try, I don't think it will rise to that level. Even if it becomes like a top five league, if it is now the likes of, the League One, Premier League, and the Saudi Pro League, for example, or those kind of areas, I still don't think it beats or trumps a Champions League game on a Wednesday. I just don't see it.
I think that it will become one of the top 5 leagues if they actually invest the way that they're talking about investing. That's a big if, because that's a lot of money, a lot of moving parts. If they do end up creating an environment, a society, a destination where people want to go to visit, to explore, to travel, pairing that with creating an exciting domestic league that is watchable with stars, I think that they can really become one of the top 5 leagues, because look at Ligue 1. I'm sorry, but Ligue 1 is not exciting. It's like maybe 3 teams, if you're lucky, that are competitive each year, and really not even that competitive, because PSG is almost always going to win because they just pump a bunch of money into it. And then the rest of the teams are more exciting to watch just in the middle of the table because that's where it's more competitive. So I do think they absolutely have the recipe and the mindset to get into that top 5 league discussion. I just don't know if they have the follow through to actually do it and to do it the right way. I actually personally would be more excited to watch the Saudi Pro League than the MLS in the United States. That is because, one, we don't have an open system. So it doesn't matter if you lose. You can go back and read all the quotes from some of the big stars that are now moving to the MLS. They say, wow, when you lose here, it's not as intense. Yeah, well, no crap, because if you lose, it doesn't matter. There is no relegation in Major League Soccer because we don't have an open system. So that for me is just so boring and so bland. It doesn't provide opportunities to any other players, any other clubs or organizations in the United States that are trying to build something exciting. So I hate that. That is my number one reason why I think I would rather watch the Saudi Pro League. And 2, they are bringing in more exciting stars that have star power that So for me, I would rather watch those players than some of the no name players that are in the MLS. Now, granted, I do really appreciate what the structure is of US soccer, where they have more American players and are trying to bring up more American players into the US ranks through the MLS and things like that. The way that they're doing it, though, I'm not a fan of. It's a closed system, so it's not cool to me. With that being said, I still won't watch the Saudi Pro League. I'm not going to be tuning in on a regular basis, even though maybe it will be easily accessible. We'll see where the streaming rights do go. That's probably a big question mark for American viewers, because there are thousands of different streaming platforms out there now. So you just have to be lucky enough to be subscribed to the right one that allows you to watch the soccer content that you so desire. But I'm not going to go out of my way to watch any Saudi Pro League.
Yeah,
I would like to watch the front 3 of Al Ahly, though.
and that was going to be my next question, to kind of think about what is going to be your club? What is your club of choice? That's the question.
The
If you're
club
going
that
to
I
pick one.
will, yeah, if I had to pick one that would actually be fairly exciting, it would be Al Ali. And that is just because of the front 3 that they will be sporting this coming season. That'll be very exciting with Riyad Mahrez, Alan St. Maximum, and Roberto Firmino. That front 3 is going to be very dangerous, and I'm excited to watch that. And they were actually champions 3 times. So they know how to win. We'll see what it looks like with the front 3.
I was going to say very similar, but I think what I'm gonna go for a little bit different, and I'm gonna say, because I'm a big Benzema fan, right? I'm gonna go for Al Ittihad, and I think for me, the seeing Benzema up front, I think it's gonna be incredible in that team, bringing him into play. Also, with the likes of Kante having a regular role, one, if not maybe a little bit past it potentially, but being one of the best in midfield in that space, mopping up area, I think he'll kill that league off. I think both those players in that squad, I think it could be a really big one to look into. So my team are going to find, and we'll probably pick up on this as the episodes go and see how our individual teams perform, right? So you're Al Hilal, and I'm going to go for Al Ittihad, and we can see where we kind of pin up. It'd be a good game for that as well. So
Don't throw me at Al Hilal. I don't want that garbage team. I'm talking
he's
about
taking a
Al
team, mate.
Ali. Al
Al, Al,
Ali.
Al, 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 Already we know what's happening here. We already know there's a.
This is so great. I'm here for it. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Yeah, we'll keep you posted on our teams that we are just so excited to support.
With that, let us close out the episode. It's been fun. We've broken it down. We've dissected it. It's been an interesting one. I don't know about you. I'm looking forward to revisiting this, perhaps in a few years' time, and see where it goes, and see where the league is, and see how this league kicks off as well. As we're going to close the episode as well, the Premier League is about to start, so we'll look into our predictions that we put together. So I'm excited to see where our league stacks up as the months go by as well. So yeah, any final words to close out the episode, Andrew?
My final words are thank you all for listening and joining us on this one. This was actually fun to research and educate ourselves on. And now you have this lovely podcast. If you need to send it to a friend that needs educated on the Saudi Pro League, this is a great way to do it because it talks about the history, the structure, the players that are part of it, the controversy as well. And if you do, we'd love to hear from you on our Instagram or TikTok. Drop us a DM, let us know your thoughts. And then if you have questions for us, hit us up there and we'll toss it in a future show.
Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good one.
Peace.